Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can modify typography in Adobe Illustrator. With being able to modify type, we're going to use a couple different typefaces that we're going to get from dafont.com. The first one we're going to be taking a look at, if you search in the top right side of dafont.com, you can type in Battipaglia, Battipaglia. I'm going to click on download over on the right side, and it's going to download onto my drive, and I'm going to click on the zip file to open it up. Double click on the file, and I'm going to open up the open type font, the first file on the folder. I can double click. If you're doing on a PC, you're just going to go up to the top left side when you double click on the file and click install. On a Mac, it's down on the bottom right side. A couple other fonts that we're going to get is Hello Samosa. Again, you can search in the top right side. We're looking for Hello Samosa. Again, download it. Click on the zip file. Double click. And again, we're going to open up the open type font and click install. I currently had it downloaded, but it's okay. And finally, the last one we're going to get is Moderna. Over on the right side, again, download, click on the zip file, and double click on the file to open up the TTF or True Type font, and click install. Once we have these three fonts, we're going to go over to Adobe Illustrator. With Adobe Illustrator, we're going to look to create a new file. We can stick to a standard 8.5 by 11 letter size piece of paper. To do this, I'm going to click Print on the top navigation. We have the letter preset, but I am going to recommend that you change out the points to inches. If you're more comfortable with a certain unit of measurement, choose whatever you're comfortable with. And I like to make sure that I name the file so that if, God forbid, something crashes, I can easily identify it, and we don't want to have untitled replacing out another file. I'm going to call this text and object demo, and I can hit create. We're going to do a numerous amount of typography and how to manipulate type to create some more creative expressions with manipulating type. But to begin with, we're going to look to draw out a type box, a text box. Over on the left side navigation, we're going to click on the capital T icon. I'm going to click and drag, and it is going to automatically fill in with filler type. With this filler type, I'm going to look to type in the word vintage with a capital V-I-N-T-A-G-E. I'm going to highlight over the text and change the font size up to 72, so it's larger and filling out the space better. Once I have it scaled up, we're going to change this font out to the Battipaglia that we downloaded. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm giving my best chance. With this, we're going to type in at the top navigation where the character panel, and I can see the font listed, giving us the script font. I click on it, and it applies into that area. Once we have the text filling in with the correct font, we're going to scale down the text box to make sure that we're just framing around the outside of the words. With this text box, we're going to hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac. I'm going to click and drag to create out a duplicate of this text. Once we have these two vintages, we're going to focus on the top vintage. And we're going to look to see how we can manipulate this. With both vintages, we're going to take a look at how we can add in strokes and adding gradients on top of the text. But we're going to look at two different methods of doing this. The first method is a method that I used growing up as I was learning Adobe Illustrator. It's not necessarily the most convenient now, but we're going to see how we can stack in layers with different strokes to build it out. Then we'll take a look at the new variation that was updated with Adobe Illustrator using the appearance panel. If you are more comfortable with that process, you can always fast forward to that section, but we're going to focus on showing both methods so you can figure out which one works best for you. With this vintage, I'm going to zoom in just so I'm focused on what I want to do. Understand that with this text box, you cannot rotate text if you're simply trying to use the selection tool. If I move my cursor to one of the outside corners, I can see this double arrow appear. When I click and drag, you see that the text is not rotating with the text box. It is always going to maintain that horizontal angle depending on how you rotate on that text. I can always step back, Command or Control Z to undo, but we're going to look to rotate this text to give it more of a dynamic angle. So I'm going to go over to the left side navigation and click on my rotate tool. With the rotate tool, like the example shows, we can get into rotating the text to more a dynamic angle, so it's going to create a little bit more interest. Doesn't need to be too expressive. We're just trying to understand that you can get into manipulating type very easily just using a couple tools on the left side navigation. So the older method of adding in strokes may not necessarily be suitable in 2024, but it's important that you can see the progression of how things were created out and how we can stack in strokes, but we're going to see a more convenient method momentarily. But the first method, we're going to look to apply a stroke. I'm going to pick out a color just so it can stand out. We have black fill with a red stroke, and I'm going to look to up the stroke to 5 point, adjusting on the weight over in the stroke panel. I'm going to reset my tools just so we have more consistency within our panel. But the stroke panel over on the right side navigation, I'm going to adjust the weight up to 5 point. Understand, because we're using text, that we cannot modify the stroke to appear on the outside of the text. We see that the red type is, or the red stroke is going inside of the black of the vintage, and I cannot modify this or fix it as it is. If you want to modify type and have a stroke appear on the outside of text, for the original method, we would have to turn our text into outlines. To do that, with the text box selected, I'm going to go up to Type at the top navigation and hit Create Outlines. Now that we create these outlines, you can see that it's showing the blue line appearing on the inside of the red stroke. But because we turned this text into outlines, now we can modify our stroke alignment. Currently it's in the center, applying both on the inside and outside of the stroke. But we could switch it to the interior, where you see that only appearing on the inside of the text, or what we eventually want to choose is the align stroke to outside. And we see that the red is appearing on the outside of the vintage text. But there are issues where we have the red stroke appearing over top parts of letters. And there is no connection currently from letter to letter. When dealing with a script font, you're looking to have that consistency and flow from the entire word. But what we're going to do is look to stack in multiple layers to create out a more dynamic look and feel to vintage. With this text selected, I'm going to hit Command or Control C, which is copy, and Command or Control F, which is paste the front. When I do paste the front, there's actually two copies, one sitting on top of the other. With this new copy on top, we're going to change our stroke color from red to white. And with this white stroke, we're going to adjust the weight down to 3 point. This gives us this red outline around the outside while having this nice white to make this vintage pop a little bit better. But you may not always necessarily want a flat, solid color inside. We may want to do a gradient. So to create a little bit more interest, we're going to add a third stroke. To add a third stroke with the white stroke that we currently have, I'm going to hit again Command or Control C, Command or Control F, pasting in another version of our text. Now we're going to change our stroke back over to the red color, and we're going to drop our weight down to 1. This gives this thin red outline right around the outside of the text. But even when I do this, it's still giving us the separation between each of the lowercase letters. Our final step for this is to turn one more additional layer without a stroke. So again, I'm going to hit Command or Control C, Command or Control F, paste the front, and I'm going to eliminate out the stroke over on the left side navigation, leaving us with just the black fill. Now we have that consistency from the I going into the N and so on with the rest of the letters. But I don't necessarily want to leave this with a flat color. I want to apply a gradient into this design. To apply a gradient, I need my gradient panel. If you don't see it located over on the right side navigation, I can go up to Window at the top navigation, alphabetical order, I can click on gradient, and I do have my gradient panel just separated. But with my gradient panel and the black fill layer selected, I'm going to click on the gradient slider down at the bottom of my gradient panel. This applies a standard black to white gradient or white to black gradient. And if I want to modify the direction of the gradient, currently the gradient is traveling from left to right on each individual letter. But I'm going to choose the gradient on the left side navigation, which will allow me to modify the direction and have it cast from top to bottom on all the letters at once. I can just move my cursor to an open space. I would not recommend clicking and dragging from one of the gradient sliders created. But when I click and drag on the text, you can see that it creates this transition from white to black. But if you do not want to have a certain color, you're definitely welcome to change out the colors to your preference. I'm going to double click on the black in the gradient slider and look to just make this a standard blue color. I can go over to the swatches inside of the gradient drop down and pick out a light blue color. Now we get a smooth transition of having this blue gradient type with this red framed outline. So just to break it down, we've created out 4 layers that stack to create this look and feel. If I make a copy just to break it down, we have the gradient that's sitting on top, the black with a thin red outline, the black with a white outline, and then the thickest variation with the thick red line on the outside. And those stack together to create out the design over on the left. It doesn't necessarily take too long, but it does get a little bit overwhelming with you're dealing with separate layers like this. Instead, we're going to see how we can maintain type, be able to edit our text without having to create outlines for our type and not having to create out multiple different layers stacking on top of each other. So we're going to look to select out the vintage on the bottom. And by the end of this, we're going to modify to create out a more chrome-like gradient that travels on the object. With the text selected, we're going to go over to the appearance panel. Over on the right side navigation, the appearance panel is a little white circle with a dotted line appearing around the outside of it. With it selected, we are going to take a look at the bottom of our appearance panel. And over to the bottom left, we have Add New Stroke. When I click on this, it's automatically going to apply a black stroke that's sitting on top of our other options. But I'm going to, again, click on the drop-down, and I can pick out a new color that can be used for our stroke. Just to make it stand out, I'm going to choose out a vibrant color. And with the stroke, we're going to up the stroke to 8 point. You can see that as we move the weight up to 8 point, it does cover up a lot of the text. But the idea of using the appearance panel is that it consolidates where we can rearrange and organize that our stroke can appear behind our text without affecting it and giving us the ability to edit our text at any time. So over in our appearance panel, with our text still selected, I'm going to look to click and drag our stroke underneath of our characters over on the left side navigation. I could drop it underneath fill as well, but the idea is that we want to put what's most significant on top or what we want to be visible on top and have the other elements sitting behind it. So when I click the stroke panel or the stroke layer underneath of the fill or characters and I drop it, we see that it sits behind the text inside of the actual text box. So it's just a matter of rearranging the layers to organize it to what you want. If I have the pink on top, just click and drag it down, and I can drop it underneath the fill or drop it underneath characters so that we're seeing the pink text behind the black type. Once we have this one stroke, we're going to look to apply the same type of method that we did previously. We're going to have two more strokes sitting on top of this. With the stroke selected, I'm going to go back down to the add new stroke, and you see that the stroke will create out a duplicate of what we just created. So we have two strokes, both at 8 point, but I'm going to change this pink color to white, and I'm going to knock the 8 point down to 5 point. And again, we're seeing the outline of the pink extending outside of the white. Understand that if I don't have one of the strokes selected, when I click add new stroke, it's going to automatically appear above my fill. Just be careful and aware that we still want to have our strokes in order, sitting below our type and our fill. So this third stroke, we're going to again change back out to our pink color. And I'm going to reduce the stroke weight down to 2 point, just giving us the thin pink line around the outside edge. So now as I look at it, we have 3 strokes. The thickest pink at the bottom, then the white in the middle, and then a thin pink line sitting above that. But the nice part about this is if I go over to my type tool, I can change the letters or add in information, change out the information to whatever I need for creating out the design. But with these effects, now that we have these 3 strokes, we're going to get into modifying our fill. We don't want to keep it to just a standard black text, but we're going to actually try a chrome gradient. To go adding in a gradient, we're going to go to the fill in the appearance panel. I'm going to click on the drop down, and I'm going to just start with a basic white to black gradient. When I click on it, it applies directly on top of the text, sitting over top of our strokes. And if I want to modify the direction of the gradient, I can click on the gradient on the left side navigation, click and drag from top to bottom to create out that gradient that I'm looking for. But to really enhance this, we're going to create a chrome look. We're going to go over to our gradient panel. In our gradient panel, we currently have just the standard white to black gradient. But I'm going to shift these colors a little bit. And I'm going to actually reverse the gradient so that I have the black on the left and the white on the right. That now leaves the vintage with the black traveling atop down to the white on the bottom. But then I'm going to look to modify the gradient slider. In the gradient slider, I'm going to look to grab the white color stop over on the right side and drag it towards the middle. This creates a lot more room over on the right side of our white, and we're going to add in a color color stops in between to help break this up and add in more colors. We're going to have 6 color stops in total. Right now we have a black over on the left, but we're going to change this color out to a dark blue or dark purple, a darker color so we can get a transition from dark to light. If I want to change it out, just double click. I'll go with the dark blue part of the swatches. If I want to enhance it or modify it in any way, I can go over to my little color palette and adjust the colors as needed. So if I want a little bit more blue tone or darkening it up, just adjust on the CMYK, or if you're doing RGB, modify the tones to the correct setting that you're looking for. But now that we have this transition, I'm going to look to add in another gradient in between the dark blue and the white. If I want to add in a color stop, I move my cursor right below the gradient slider, click a point, and it creates a blend between the dark color and the light color. If I double click on it, I'm going to look for a little bit more vibrant blue. I'm going to click and drag my cyan a little bit up and drop my magenta a little bit down. So we're getting this now more vibrant blue tone and gradient. But again, we're going to have 6 different color stops. Over to the right side of this white, I'm going to add in 3 more. Right now they're all white, and I'm going to leave this right end as white. But for these 2 to the right side of our middle white, I'm going to double click and look to do a dark purple tone. If I want to bring up the color, make it darker, make sure again you have the text selected so we can see it applying onto our vintage as you're modifying it. I'm looking for a deep purple, so I'm going to adjust on my CM and K. I get the dark purple, and then I can double click on the middle white. I'm going to look for more of a pink tone. As I click and drag it to these tones, we can see that it's creating out this very interesting chrome-like look on top of the text. And just to give it a sharper edge, a sharper divide between the blue side and the purple side, I'm going to click on one of the diamond shapes at the top middle and pull it to the left side so it runs into the white middle to give us this harsh separation between the blue and the purple. If I want to redraw the gradient, I can always click on the gradient on the left side, click and drag it to adjust to the location that I'm looking for. I can change the angle if I want to go with a sharper angle, or just go across with the text. Understand, if you are looking to rotate the text, you would still have to go over to the rotate tool to adjust and turn it onto more of a dynamic shape. But you can see how cool it is to have this vintage chrome-like look on top of your type with your gradient. So that is the process for creating out this stroke effect, now with the more modern variation on Adobe Illustrator. I believe it's a lot more efficient, keeps everything confined into one single layer. It's just a matter of understanding you have control within the appearance panel. Now we're going to take a look at how we can get into modifying type with paths and being able to bend type in a more interesting fashion. If I go over to my left side navigation, I'm going to click on my pen tool. With the pen tool, I'm going to look to draw out a curved line. I can click and drag, and to make it simple, I'm going to keep it to a black and white, or even eliminate out the fill color, so we're only dealing with a black stroke. But with this black stroke, we're going to look to draw a winding line. That can go up and down. It can even loop the loop if we decide to draw out a curve or a loop on this line. But once I'm satisfied with the line, I can hit escape to end the line there. Understand, in Illustrator, we can use lines like this to create paths that can become type lines. So we have this line that's looping up and down and looping around. If I go over to my type tool in the left side navigation, I can move my cursor right onto this line, and I'll see that my cursor will adjust to recognize this as a path. So when I click on this, it automatically places in type that wraps on type of the text. To make it more efficient, I'm going to change out the font and change the size so I can see this a little bit easier. I'll drop the size of the font down, let's say 21 point, and I'm going to switch this font over to Moderna. We just originally installed it. When I click on it, we can see the lorem ipsum filler type, and I can continue to write in information, and you'll see that it will rotate and flip around following the path up until you get to the last letter. If I wanted to change out the information prior to, I can go over to my character panel at the top navigation, or On the top navigation, go down to Window, Type, and Character to bring up our character panel. I'm going to pull it over to the right side just so I can see it. It is this A icon that we can change out the font and choose what we're looking to use and modify. So again, I'm going to change this out to Moderna. Change the size of the font just so it's more legible. I'll do 21 point. And when I click on this, you'll see that it will wrap with filler type of the Lorem Ipsum dollars, and it will show out all the information. If you want to modify this line, yes, it is chaotic when you have this wrapping up and down or around. You can simplify it to have simpler lines. If I wanted to draw out just a simple curve, click and drag a point. I'm going to hit escape to end the line. And I'm going to switch this black stroke just so I can see the stroke around the outside of the object. But again, when I click on the type tool, if I move my cursor onto this area, wherever I click on the line will begin the type information. But if we take a closer look, I can get into actually changing the placement of the type as well. Right now we have the Lorem Ipsum wrapping on the top of the text. But there's these little blue bars that extend from this type path. If you want to adjust the placement so that the Lorem Ipsum is facing on the interior of the text, I would want to move my cursor onto one of these little blue lines. Do not select on the little white square next to it. But on these little blue lines, I can click and drag to adjust the placement, where I can drag it up or down, or to the right or to the left, so we have more text. Or if I go to the middle, we have this blue bar in which I can change the direction of the type and have it appear on the bottom of the line rather than the outside. So we can flip type to be appearing on the opposite direction. And you can get more creative with how this text styles out. So if I wanted to have a perfect circle and have information that wraps on that element, I'm going to go over to first my ellipse tool, look to draw out a circle shape. Understand that I cannot apply text on the outside of a ellipse, a circle, using the type tool. If I were to try clicking on this object right now, it would only allow me to put text inside of that shape. Instead, what you would have to do is have the stroke on the outside, but I'm going to click on the direct selection tool, the white arrow. I'm going to click on the bottom anchor point of the circle, just selecting the bottom half of this circle. We're going to hit Command or Control C, then hit backspace, cutting out the bottom portion of that circle, leaving us this top half. But because we did the Control or Command C, we can now hit Command or Control F, and that pastes the front, placing in the bottom portion that we just originally deleted. So now we have two half circles, two lines that make up what would have been a full circle. This is where you want to experiment and see how text can wrap around the object. So if I click on this path on the top of our circle shape, when I click, we see the text wrapping on top of the shape itself. If I want to reduce the type down, I can make it bigger or smaller. If I want to center the type, I can go to my paragraph panel at the top navigation, center it. Or again, if we want to move it to the interior, have it upside down, I can click and drag the blue bar to adjust the placement so it is flipped upside down. But this is more likely used when you have text on the bottom and text on the top. So if we have the Lorem Ipsum running on the top of this half circle, we're then going to click on the type tool to run text on the bottom of our circle. When I click on the path below, it's automatically going to place text just on the outer edge, but we can see that it's actually applying over on the left side of the line. This is actually appearing on the outside of the path rather than the inside. Right now we're only seeing an L because when I clicked, it was applying to a certain area. So if I were to do that same process again, I'd probably want to try clicking on the left side, and we can get the text wrapping on the bottom, but currently appearing on the outside of the half circle. If I want to change the placement of the type, having it facing upright, I'm going to move my cursor with the selection tool, click and drag this blue bar, pulling it upward to face upside or to face the right direction for our view. Now we have type that is appearing on the top of a circle, and that would be running on the bottom half of the circle, facing the same direction. With this information, you can easily highlight the information, type in whatever you're trying to display right onto that path line. And it's very simple once you do some practice, and it's important to practice a few times to get comfortable with it. Yes, it can be extremely overwhelming to have a curved line applying a lot of information. But once you get the hang of it, you can create some very interesting layouts and look and feel with text. If I highlight over the text, I can go over to my character panel. If I want to create a little bit more spacing, I'm going to take a look at my tracking. I like to use the tracking better than the kerning. It gives me a little bit more creative freedom. If I click on the drop down, I could try 100 or create out more spacing with 200 for my tracking. And you see that it spreads out the word demonstration, giving us more space to work with, extending around the area. But there are many different ways of modifying out type. We've taken a look at wrapping text on a path. We're taking a look at how to add in strokes and effects on objects. We can also get more fun and creative. If I create out a text box and I type in the word design, I'm going to highlight the text and turn this font into Hello Samosa. I'm going to reset my text back out to 0 for the tracking so that it's just the word design. I'm going to scale up the size of the text. We'll go back up to 72 just so we can easily see it. With design, you don't have to, or you can experiment with how creative you want to be. Rather than leaving text flat or just using the rotate tool to rotate it on a slight angle, we have what is known as the type warps to be able to create some more interesting dynamic visuals. So with this type box of design, you're going to go up to Effect at the top navigation, go down to Warp, and under Warp, we're going to first just click on the top option, which is Arc. When I click on Arc, we're getting the view that the design is bending like an arc. This is the first style of many options. If I click on the drop down for styles, we have arc upper or lower. We have arch. Arch is different because it's not bending the outside like arc does, but when I choose on arch, it keeps it vertical on all the different letters. We have bulge, shell lower or shell upper. Flag creates a little bit more dynamic visual. Wave is kind of just bending the top and bottom, but keeping the constraints of the shape. Fish, you can get into bending out the shape so it's thinner on one side or thicker on the other. Rise, we can see that it can bend from bottom left up to the right, or if I change the bend, I can have it facing the other direction. But it's important to experiment and see how text can be manipulated using these different features. Oftentimes, a lot of the more consistent views of type might be just doing a standard arc, but maybe I want to have it bending downward or bending it upward. Just be careful, using the warp does not make up for creating text on a type path when it comes to a half circle. But it can be more interesting than just leaving out flat, stagnant type. So if I want to adjust on the bend, you can also get into distorting out shapes. So we have one side that's bigger than the other. Or expanding out to create some different angle or distortion on the shape. That's where you really want to get to experiment. So many things you can do, but just understand it's a matter of experimentation. Again, it's under effects. You can go down to warp, and you have many options to choose from. We can also play with type and how we can get into manipulation of an angle. I'm going to draw another text box. And I'm going to type in perspective. If the text gets too big for the text box, just go over to the selection panel, expand it out so we can see it. With this perspective text, I want to go over to take a look at our free transform tool. With the free transform tool, it allows us to get into manipulating out type, to change angles and perspectives, to create some more interest on type. But there are some limitations when it comes into working with perspective. If I go over to the perspective tool itself, the perspective distort, when I try to click on a certain angle, it will not permit me to be able to grab and manipulate the type because it is still text. Like we saw earlier with the issue with vintage, I couldn't put a stroke around the text. When it is text, you cannot apply different effects of the perspective distort or the free distort. So please just be aware that you're going to have to be able to turn the text into outlines before you get into more creativity. So if I have the perspective on this selected, I'm going to go up to type, create outlines, and now it creates out the outline variation. Now this gives me the freedom to get into using the perspective distort or using the free distort. With the perspective distort, I can move my cursor to click and drag, and you see that it's going to manipulate the right side of the shape only. Or if I click and drag the top right corner inward, it's only going to affect the top portions without affecting the bottom. But this can be very limiting in how you modify out the perspective of the text. I often choose to go with the free distort because I can manipulate any corner very easily, just adjusting the corners to the perspective that I'm looking for. So if I wanted to create this text to look more flat, laying down, I could adjust the corners individually to get the angle that I'm looking for. So if I were to click off of the object, now I have this traveling into the background. Or again, if I want to get into modifying these out, I can pull corners, make them tighter, modify them to any direction that I'm looking for. Or if I want to bring this to make it appear as if it's sitting on a wall, just individually grab the corners until you are satisfied with how the distortion is being manipulated. So if I want it traveling in the distance, just pull one side thicker than the other. When I click off of it, we get perspective traveling into the distance, giving us the sense that it is showing depth within the word. But I'm going to consolidate these pieces, and we're just going to test out how we can get into experimenting with shapes that we've previously done using the shape builder, and how we can wrap in text or take text like vintage and highlight it a little bit stronger. So I'm going to create some room down the bottom portion. And for this bottom portion, we're going to look to draw out a circle shape. I can go over to the ellipse tool, click and drag to create out a circle. It's currently black, and what I'm going to look to do is create an offset that's going to create a inside cut of this circle. I could always create a duplicate, Command or Control C, Command or Control F, and look to scale this down. If I scale it down holding down Option and Shift, or Alt and Shift at the same time, I can scale it inward to create out a smaller variation of the text. With these selected together, I can go over to the shape builder, hold down Alt or Option to cut out the interior, leaving us this outside of the shape. I could also draw out that same circle, go up to Object, Path, and Offset Path. With Offset Path, I'm going to do a negative number. This will allow me to be able to adjust on the offset to find a happy medium or the size that I'm looking for. Say it's negative 0.5 inches. I click OK. Now I have these two circles, one sitting inside the other. And again, just as we did before, I click on the shape builder, hold down Alt or Option to cut out the interior of that shape. The reason why we did this, though, is that I can get into wrapping text around this area or creating the sense that it is appearing inside of the shape. You can start with a new circle, or when it's more convenient, I like to go to the direct selection tool, the white arrow, and I'm going to click on the top anchor point of this circle. I could do the interior circle as well. Both work. But with clicking on the top anchor point, I'm going to hit Control or Command C and Command or Control F. It creates out that half circle by itself. And just so we can see it a little bit better, once I hit Command C, Control C or Command C, I'm going to hit backspace. And with the regular selection tool, I'm going to hit Command F to paste it to front so it's appearing exactly where I want it. But to make it more visible, I'm going to just change out the color so you can see it from your computer. And I'm just going to knock it out to the stroke. If I adjust the weight in any way of that stroke, just so you can see it a little bit further, we can see that it's only appearing on the top half. But with this text, I can go over to the Type tool, move my cursor right towards the left side, so that I can put text on this path. So let's say I want to type in demonstration. I'll go with a smaller type first, changing from 72 to 24. If I don't like it being right against the edge, I can move my cursor to the top of this path, hold Shift, and scale it out so it fits a little bit better. For the bottom portion, I would repeat the same process. I'm going to click on the bottom anchor point, hit Command or Control C, click on the selection tool, and click off the object. This time I'm going to hit Control or Command F, pasting in the bottom half of the circle. Again, I'll look to change out the stroke so you can easily see it. Adjusting the color up and adjusting the weight so it's a little bit more visible. But again, I'm going to click on the Type tool, move my cursor down onto this line. I'm going to again click on the right side because I know it's going to flip my text upside down. Or if it doesn't, we can go over to the left side, just hit Command or Control or Command Z to undo. But I'm going to change this text color out to white so we can easily see it. And I'm going to type in for graphics, or graphic 1. And again, I don't like it bumping right on the edge of it, so I'm going to grab the bottom middle, hold shift, and scale it down with a bit. Right now, the font sizes might be slightly different. And I can take a look at the top navigation. I currently have 26.2441 for the text size here. What I could look to do is highlight that number, Command or Control C, highlight over for graphic 1, and I'm going to hit select over the 21.9 and hit Command or Control V to paste in the number so it's consistent, so that they are the same size. This just helps to create consistency within the design. So if I wanted to then take the vintage that I did earlier today, I can select on that type, bring it across, and now we're starting to create out a logo design. Or we can have the main message of the vintage. Maybe I want to change the information instead of for graphics. I'll say thrift shop. On the top, I could change it out to since 1952 or 54. So it helps to create a very dynamic looking design when we start to compile different tools that we've learned previously and put them together with these new features. If I wanted to consolidate these circles or make this a little bit smaller so vintage stands out a little bit better, I can shrink down the other aspects, and now vintage stands out a little bit better overall. So there's many ways of experimenting. It's just a matter of how you can apply it into your own creative fashion. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again soon.